still remember how excited the team at Wine Access was when they found this producer in Champagne and brought it back to it, and it still remains a favorite of mine today. This is the Maurice Grumier Champagne Jônt edition, which means this is a special cuvee, and it's also a grower's champagne, which means they are growing their own grapes and making their own champagne. Now, they also sell to a few other famous houses that you might have heard of, like Perrier-Jouet and Taittinger. She's coming out. Woo! But they've always made a little of their own wine on the side in a very special way, I might add. And like so many of the great ones prior to that, not a lot of their champagne was being imported into the US. So wine access really changed all that, not only for Maurice Grumier, but also for Jaunt, where this is actually served. I've not been there myself, to every guest who arrives at the restaurant alongside something exquisite and delicious from the kitchen. Now, what Grumier is doing differently, but similarly to another very famous champagne house that's very difficult to get and also very expensive, is this Solera style of aging. Champagne is already incredibly expensive and labor intensive to make, but the Solera edition really amplifies that. And basically, all that means is they're taking wines from every single vintage and they're leaving them in barrel and then combining them in various portions. So this particular cuvee is actually 60% from the 2019 vintage and the remainder from vintages that are even older than that, going all the way back to 2005, which is why even though this was bottled in 2020 and only recently disgorged, you're getting this really beautiful, nutty sort of caramelly aroma and also seeing this more golden color. A lot of that has to do with the fact that the base wines for this champagne has been aged for an extended period of time and has been aged in barrel. Now, I'll also mention that this is an Extra-Brut champagne, which is going to mean that it's on the lower side of the spectrum when it comes to dosage, so very little sugar added after disgorgement. And on the nose, you're getting so much richness, but vibrancy as well. This is what I love so much about aging wines in this way, is that you're capturing all the great things that we love about an older wine, but you're leaving in all of the freshness. So it doesn't smell like an old wine, but it has all of the sort of reminiscence of it. Almondy, nutty, floral, Meyer lemon, and then you also have those hallmark brioche croissant flavors going on as well. And then you get to the palate. And it feels intensely weighted and rich and decadent. But then there's this lift, there's this brightness and this length that feels lifted and so refreshing, which is such an interesting juxtaposition between the heaviness and the richness of this wine. I also love the super fine, tiny bubbles in this. Someone recently asked me about how to find wines that don't hurt your mouth. And age is usually the way to do that. And I'm specifically talking about sparkling wines, of course, but sometimes you get those really coarse sparklings, those ones with the coarse bubbles, and it feels really aggressive, like it's tearing your mouth out. When champagne or sparkling wine is made in this way, when it's made with the care and the labor and all of the specifications that something like this is made, you get those really beautiful, tiny, fine bubbles. Now, some of you might be wondering why I have this champagne in a white wine glass and not a flute or even a coupe. And that's because when champagne or sparkling wines are made like this, a wine glass that allows it to move around and showcase some of the aromatics and allow you to really get in there is really what is preferred here. A champagne flute is going to be too narrow. You can't really get your nose in there, and it also doesn't allow the aromatics to pop out. And then also when you're tasting this wine, this is a wine that really wants to hit all aspects of your palate, not just the center, which is really what the champagne flute allows for. I love this for someone who prefers an Extra-Brut style, but who still really wants the texture and the richness of a champagne that gives you weightiness, that gives you something that feels a little bit more dense, but doesn't make you feel overwhelmed. I can see this pairing with so many different dishes, but I also wouldn't mind drinking this alone. This is one of the few champagnes out there that I feel like can actually do really well all by itself. But at a minimum, maybe a handful of potato chips, maybe some popcorn. At a maximum, you can take this with you for your entire dinner. I do include steak in that. I think steak and champagne is one of those very underappreciated things. And especially when it has this richness and it has this texture, I think this is something that can go the distance with most meals.